Hi, welcome to the last Ret vlog before Battle for Azeroth goes live and we'll start leveling. And with that in mind, I thought I'd talk a little bit about some tips and tricks for leveling. So I'm going to cover basically the talents that I'd prefer, the PvP talents if you're going to go war mode, legendaries and other gearing considerations, including a little look at some of the raid gear. So first of all, the question that people will mull around at the start of any leveling process is, would I be better off going as protection spec? Personally, I don't. It's one of those things, a lot of people think, well, you know, in protection spec, of course you can grab whole hordes of mobs, pull them onto you. The reality is that in most cases, mobs are not that densely packed. And often when you see people thinking they're being clever going around grabbing whole loads of them, what they're actually doing is wasting a load of time trying to gather some up, annoying me because I'm trying to get some of them. And occasionally they'll go too far just to try and grab, because they'll be thinking, oh, I can take more than this, I can take more than this. They'll go too far and some of them will snap back anyway. It all seems like a waste of time to me. There are some situations where you do have a lot of mobs and maybe it'd be useful. But by and large for leveling, I would just say is rare. Particularly if you've got decent gear. I mean, I've got very good gear. I'm going to go over to things and smash them in the early levels anyway. So no, you know, for me, I'm always going to level up as Ret. So given that, if we're going to do that, first thing, let's have a little look at PvP talent. So if you're going to go war mode, a lot of people talking about war mode, at least for the leveling process. For the first day, you should be relatively safe, I would have thought. And you can always play it by ear anyway. If it's getting too inconvenient, you can always, you know, Hearthstone back to Stormwind or Orgrimmar and change it and then come back. But if you are going to do that, the accepted wisdom. So the first one, you know, you've got to go for the crowd control-y one. Just pick whichever out of the three you'd prefer. I mean, I went for adaptation. I don't really care. But in terms of the ones that could actually give you a DPS benefit, so I'm looking at these talents from the point of view of getting some PvE benefit. I'm assuming I'm not going to come across enemy players, and if we are, we're not going to engage. So the accepted wisdom is Lawbringer, Divine Punisher, and Hammer of Reckoning. So having a little look at those. So Lawbringer is very judgmenty. So when you use judgment, it puts Lawbringer on the target. Lasts for 45 seconds. So you can get a few judgments in at the time. And it says all enemies with Lawbringer effect on them will suffer 5% of their maximum health in holy damage. Now this looks like it'd be a situation where, you know, in a group of mobs, all it means is cycle around them with your judgment. So you can use judgment on one. Just immediately switch to the next one when you use judgment on that. The first one will take 5% of its health as holy damage and you'll apply it to the next one and so on. However, the next one, Divine Punisher, what this does is casting 2 consecutive judgments on the same enemy will generate 3 holy power. So there's a bit of, you know, a decision to be made there. What it could be, if you're against 2, for example, I might be tempted to do judgment on the first, then judgment on the second, and then the third judgment on the second as well, to get the consecutive one. I mean, if it was a large group, you know, I might... It sort of depends on what they are and what your Divine, you know, Storm's doing. But, you know, I'd be thinking you'd favour the Divine Punisher in that one and just keep loading up your judgments on one. Because it's a free Divine Storm on each one with a large enough group. It takes you a while to get round them all anyway, to put judgments on them all. But I haven't done any maths on that one. And then the last one, Hammer of Reckoning. Hammer of Reckoning is the awesome one. So obviously you've got to find a keybind for it because this isn't a passive one. You know, and people who do PvP will of course know what these do anyway because they haven't really changed as far as I can tell. But if you've got your greater blessings on yourself, then you get Reckoning. So with 50 stacks of Reckoning, you get to hurl your magical hammer that strikes it for quite a lot of holy damage. It does about a double of a like judgment or something like that. Maybe not quite double judgment if you've got your tier 21 set bonuses. And you get Avenging Wrath for 6 seconds, so that's always nice as well. If you've taken that with Hammer of Wrath, then you get 2 loads of hammers, don't you? But those are the ones that are useful for PvE, for DPS purposes, to get a benefit. Because these things do work out in the world. They won't work in dungeons. As soon as you go into an instance dungeon or something like that, then they won't work there. But they work while you're out in the world. My personal plan will be to level up with war mode initially, and then I'm not going to keep it on. I'm just going to take it off as soon as I get to level cap. I'm not going to wait till the point where it becomes inconvenient, because I know when it'll happen. It'll happen when I'm in a really awkward place that's taking me ages to get to for a world quest, and then I'm going to get bothered. So I'm not going to bother with that, because of course my gear won't help me then, because at level cap we'll all be in shit gear. Now, in terms of general talents, there are like provisos. I don't think there is an accepted wisdom of leveling talents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the ones I've picked and my reasons for them. So the first thing to point out is I don't expect to be able to change talents all the time. I'm not taking a load of tomes with me. I'm not going to keep nipping into rest areas to change my talents. And I don't want to change talents at the start of a dungeon if I decide to go into some dungeons as I level up, which I may or may not. I haven't decided yet. But because especially at the end of it, because you still need a tome to change back. So I'm just going to go with a set of talents that'll be fine for everything. So Zeal, just because that's fine for everything. Righteous Verdict is okay. The problem is, remember, it doesn't buff your Templar's Verdict unless you've already used one. So you've got to use Templar's Verdict twice in a combat for it to be any good within 6 seconds. And initially I'm going to be going up to some mobs. Now, some mobs, all right, I might get some benefit. But there's other mobs where I'm just going to be smashing them. So I don't really feel I'm going to get the benefit from that. Execution Centers at the moment, again, is not a huge benefit. And again, there's a certain ramp up of it. You've got to get your Holy Power up first and then use it. And then it's just not going to be worth it for leveling, where I expect to crunch the hell out of things for the first few levels. So Zeal, just stick that one on. Now, Blade of Wrath, I'm taking specifically because of the RPPM nature of not only Art of War, but the Blade of Wrath effect itself. There is going to be some movement between mobs. You're going to get a lot more, for your combat time, a lot more procs than you might normally expect. Because, you know, you'll spend a certain amount of time moving between mobs. So Blade of Wrath just seems to be a better one for that world content stuff, that solo world content stuff. On to the next one. Fist of Justice is normally my go-to talent. But the reality is I'm not going to need to stun that often. So Fist of Justice largely becomes wasted. So I'm going to go for Blinding Light instead. The purpose being, if I find if I pull a large group of very angry things and I'm thinking, oh crap, I can always use that. And I've got two options then. I can just leg it. Or, I mean, I can use Divine Storm's Consecrations if I had that, which I'm not going to take that, but if I did, without any real trouble, because holy damage doesn't break it. It's only other types of damage. So, you know, and I'm not expecting to need any of the stuns very often. But out of all the talents, the one that's most likely to come in useful is Blinding Light. And then I'd probably switch it back to Fist of Justice at level cap for sort of more dungeon-related content. On to the next row. Now, Wake of Ashes, again, largely because you're going to get to use it effectively more often in combats because of some travelling time as you go from one group of mobs to another. I just feel that you're going to get more use out of Wake of Ashes. Consecration is fine, but again, a lot of the time I could plant it and before it wears off, I've killed it and moved on anyway. So I just feel Wake of Ashes is going to be more useful for that solo content. Keep saying levelling, but it applies equally to level-capped world questing. When you're out in the world, you're doing your solo stuff. On to the next row, Cavalier. Just again, movement is going to be a key thing. That's where I'm going to lose the time, having to travel from where I'm killing mobs or whatever to the next lot. Unbreakable Spirit, I'm barely going to need Divine Shield, if at all. And, you know, I'm certainly not going to need to use it every 3.5 minutes or anything like that. Same with the other, you know, defensives. And eye for an eye, again, I'm not going to feel weak at all. Even when you're getting onto the quest gear and you're going to feel weaker, it's still okay. But Cavalier, that extra movement is going to be more useful. On to the next one. Now, Word of Glory is my go-to when I'm doing group stuff. Really good now. But Selfless Healer for soloing is also really good. Because the Selfless Healer is now a misnomer. It started off being more like Selfless Healer. So what you did with that, for those who don't know, is it's 4 stacks now. But every time you use a Holy Power Spender, you get a stack of this thing. And each stack reduces the cast time by 25%. So if you do it 4 times before you use Flash of Light, then that means it's instant cast. You can use it on the move. So you can finish a mob, you've got 30% of your health lost or something like that. As you move into the next mob, you can just use Selfless Healer on you and heal yourself up. But the other thing is, for each stack you also get, it does 10% extra healing. Now that only used to apply if you used it on someone else, hence selfless healer. Didn't used to work on yourself. But now that's been removed, it works just as well on you as it does on anyone else. So the name means nothing anymore. It's no, So I prefer that for solo stuff now. Because it's instant cast, it just gives you that nice fresh heal. You're not wasting holy power doing it if you're on an elite mob and you sort of need it for that. And you'll get pretty much as much healing from that as Word of Glory when you consider Word of Glory, minute recharge time with your 2 charges, and it costing holy power and all the rest of it. Selfless healer doesn't. You just use your holy power spenders, which you would anyway, and every 4th one you get a free heal. And if you need to in emergency do another one, well, you can do it. It's going to be a really short cast time anyway, and you'll still get, like, if you've done it 3 times, 30% extra healing, so it's all fine. And then on to the last one, Inquisition. Now, you'd think to yourself, well, Divine Purpose, surely for solo stuff. And possibly. And for the first, or when you get to the later levels, possibly I would switch back to Divine Purpose maybe. But Inquisition, I have a particular reason for using it. Not only is it actually fine to keep it up as long as you're keeping yourself brisk, moving from trash to trash, it's not that big a deal. It's not like you're having to start it back up again every time you get to a new one. You're not going to be killing some mobs and then having to trek for miles before you get to the next mobs. So it feels fine keeping it up for me. But the haste is also going to come in useful. I'm going to talk about that in the legendary section, which is what I'm going to talk about now. But just in terms of talents, I'm not saying those are the ones that are clearly the best for soloing. It can depend on your own personal preference and situation, things like that. But for me, those are the ones that I'm finding the most useful for solo stuff, and so those are the ones I'm going to go with for leveling. Now, on to legendaries. Again, there are certain choices here. The only one that's definitely out is Prydaz. Forget it. Because obviously, the first thing you're going to do is go and get yourself the artifact neck, which is what you're going to need on you, for using Azeroth gear and all the rest of it. So yeah, forget about Pride. If you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm a bit weak, I'll get Prydaz because then I get an Absorb Shield. It's got good stats on it as well. No. Now I will be going with Sephir's Secret and Agrimar's Stride for the speediness. Simple as that. I am going to be mullering everything. I'm going to be smashing things to pieces. The only thing that's slowing me down is my feet. So I want to be as speedy as possible. And this is where I was talking about Inquisition here, because with Agrimar's Stride, of course, the speed boost you get from it is based upon your highest secondary stat. My highest secondary stat is Haste, which is a good thing to have at the moment, because Haste is sort of our, best secondary stat on balance. Remember the usual proviso, it all sort of depends, because if you get way ahead in one particular stat, then you can lose another. But it is Haste, and the more haste you got, the faster you go. So that's why I'm also, just never mind from if you got my gear is sort of item level 255 to 260, depending on exactly what combination I use. At that level, it doesn't matter if you use a few pieces that might not be perfectly optimal. There's no need to min-max the damage at this point. For me, it's min-maxing the haste to get, the faster speed in there. And Inquisition, of course, gives you extra haste. So, it makes sense for me to take Inquisition because it's just a load of straight up haste, which I can use to make myself faster, a little bit faster still. That can also include having some bits of gear. If you've got some bits of gear, and I have a couple of bits, not many actually, I don't have much with speed, but I think I've got at least one bit, which is like 5 item levels lower than what I'm actually wearing, but it's got speed on it, so I'm using that as well, because speed for me is everything. Now, let's say your gear isn't you haven't got a monster set from like Mythic Antorus or anything like that, and you're thinking, I want the legendaries to improve my power, because I'm not that strong. Then there are, again, some options. Obviously, Soul of the High Lord is a strong option because it gives you your Divine Purpose, and you can take Inquisition as well. I wouldn't necessarily favour Crusade in this particular case because, again, you're not going to need wings that often. There are some elite mobs that would be, where wings is useful, and maybe Crusade would be extra useful on those. But the others are still useful, and for most of the time, you're not going to need wings. You might use it, but you're not going to need it. Even if your gear isn't that great. So yeah, solo the High Lord, and then you can use Inquisition. You get best of both worlds. That's perfectly suitable. The Scarlet Inquisitor's Expurgation is potentially good as well, because of course the buff to Divine Storm, especially with groups of mobs, and because it's, you know, it's going to tick up anyway, just naturally, and then you can unleash it. So that's not a bad option. You know, most of the good DPS legendaries are not going to be bad options, but if I was going to take two, those are the ones I take. Obviously, the issue with Scarlet Inquisitor's Expurgation is that it is a tier slot one, so, you know, that might be an issue for you. It sort of depends on what gear you've got. But those are what I'd be thinking is, but you know, there's no real bad ones apart from Prydaz. Prydaz is a bad one. Obviously, the helm, if you've got the legendary helm, you poor bastard, because I've had this question come up before. Don't think, oh, it lets me do damage if you use Fist of Justice. I know, I'll use Fist of Justice. No. It's pathetic. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if you've got it and you happen to, Fist of Justice happens to be a sensible thing to do, then all right, fine. Or Hammer of Justice, I should say, rather. I'm just too used to it being Fist of Justice. But yeah, that's okay. But yeah, I would say for DPS ones, if it were me, I'd be thinking Solo the High Lord and Scarlet Inquisitor's Expurgation. But in actual fact, because my gear is to the point where I don't need the legendaries to boost it still further, because I'm going to be pummeling things anyway, it really isn't going to make that much difference. I'm just going to go for the speed. So I'm going for Sephir's Secret and Agrimar Stride. Now, in terms of a few other little gear considerations, first of all, you'll be clearing your bag. You may have already cleared your bags out. It may well be too late for this. But if you haven't, I would keep all of your tier gear. All of it. Don't just think to yourself, oh, I've got my 4 preferred pieces and that's all fine. There's a few things you have to consider. First of all, Azerite pieces. As well as getting your artifact next, you're going to get an Azerite piece straight away. The Azerite pieces are helms, shoulders and chest. They're all tier slots. So if you're using those, I mean, in my preferred 4, for example, shoulders and chest are 2 of them. Well, that's no good. What it means is, of course, I can take the helm first and then avoid that whole problem. But then after that, what do? So keep them, because it might be that at a certain point, one of 2 things may happen. Either you get an Azerite piece in where you've got a tier slot. So, for example, I've got the helm, but let's say the next tier piece, I have to take either Azerite piece, sorry. I have to take either shoulders or chest. And I'm thinking, oh, that's going to take my 4 set away. But lo and behold, it won't, because I've also got tier cloak, and I've got tier gloves. I can just use those, and I can still have 4 pieces. So then that's all great. So that's what I'm keeping up all of them for, to keep the set bonuses for as long as possible or as long as practicable. Then there's another issue. You might get a piece that also occupies a tier gear, and it, like Titan Forges or something, all of a sudden it's, oh, this is amazing. You know, this is more for later levels especially. Then again, it's useful to be able to swap a piece in, you know. So keep them all until you're definitely going to have to be losing those set bonuses. Now, when you do start losing those set bonuses, remember, you might get to a situation where you have to go from 4 pieces a tier to 3 pieces a tier. Well, at that point, the 3rd tier piece isn't doing you any good. So do you have any, at the moment, non-tier pieces that you're not using, but they're actually technically on a one-on-one basis better than the tier piece you are using? Because as soon as that tier piece isn't giving you a set bonus anymore, because you've gone from 4 pieces to 3 pieces, and one of them is now spare, then you could swap it in for the slightly better non-tier piece that you have. So again, I would keep good, any non-tier pieces you have that are better than the, just on a stats basis, the tier pieces you're currently wearing, I'd keep those around as well, just in case. And then what I would say is, after level 116, I wouldn't be agonising too much about keeping your tier set bonuses. I'd just embrace it. Obviously, you still sort of prefer to keep them if you can, your 2 set bonus at least. But, I mean, you won't be able to have your 4 set bonus at this point, because you will have 3 pieces of Azerite, or you haven't been doing the content properly. But I would just largely embrace it and just go with the quest upgrade. If it's an upgrade, it's an upgrade. Haste may be tricky. I find myself getting to level cap and ending up on about 4% haste. It's all very distressing. But unfortunately, this is the way of it. Usually in expansions, there you get to build it up quite a bit, but not so much in this one. We're not going to build it up high. And then the final thing just to talk about is, so I was, because on the beta at the moment you can go and buy 370 gear, which is heroic Uldir level gear, from a vendor just to try different things out. And I went with Sol Sacra's profile for Simcraft, which is largely the raid gear you'd want. Now this is mostly based on Uldir, so if anyone wants to know, let's say your guilds are asking you which pieces are you going to be wanting, there's not a huge amount of choice in most cases. But this is the sort of sim profile. Now don't take this as a BIS list. Remember, they don't technically exist because Warforged, Titanforged and all the rest of it. Even though that doesn't apply to, well, the weapons are now only going to Warforged up to potentially plus 10. But, you know, that's still enough to make it better than the baseline one. And Azerite pieces won't do that at all. They're just, their stock item level is fixed. But nonetheless, these are the sort of ones that we're looking at and where they come from. So for the Helm of Defiled Laboratorium, which drops from Gahoon. Shoulders, now, this is the only one that doesn't drop in Uldir. It's the Pauldrons of the Horned Horror, and they're from Waycrest Manor. Now, there are shoulders that drop in Uldir, but I don't think they're considered all that great. It might be to do with the utility. The utility ring is pretty weak. For raiding, that is. And also remember that you can get, if you're pushing your Mythic Plus, you know, you can get Azerite pieces from these dungeons. It is the only place you can get the Azerite gear when you weekly cash. You can't get them directly from the dungeons in Mythic Plus. So you do have to hope you get lucky on the chest. But if you do, and you get the Pauldrons of the Horned Horror, and I couldn't always sim it, but if the item level is round about the same level as your other stuff, and if you're doing the Mythic Pluses at the appropriate level for your level of raiding, then it should be. Then the one from the shoulders from Waycrest Manor, way to go. Then for the back, Fetid Horror's Tangle Cloak, that drops off Fetid Devourer, I suppose it would be obvious. The chest place of Apocalyptic Machinations from Zul Reborn. The wrist, Imperious Fan Bracers from Zul Reborn. Hands, Waste Disposal Crushers from Fetid Devourer. The waist, Decontaminator's Great Belt from Mother, second boss. The legs, the Greaves of Unending Vigil from Talok. But also remember, if I should have said this with the waist as well, legs and waist, you can craft epic versions with blacksmithing. So if you take blacksmithing, you want to min-max it, you may well be wearing those ones, you know, just have to see. To begin with, then feet, War Boots of Absolute Eradication, which drops from Zekvos, Herald of Nzoth. And for the rings, you've got Rot Scout Ring from Mother and Band of Certain Annihilation from Mithrax the Unraveler. And then the weapon, Core Hammer of Guardian, drops off Talok. Now, that's not the one that Sol Sacra used in his profile, but I took it because it's from the first boss. You're most likely to get it at a decent level. Because you also have to think, even if you're going to treat something as a BIS list, you're more, you know, you're going to be progressing through certain bosses. So if anything is around about the same on an earlier boss, well, you're more likely to get it because you're going to be killing it more often and more quickly. So I sort of tend to go for that. And it's got haste on it as well, which is nice. Now, with all that at 370 item level, the haste I have, just to give you a bit of an idea of where you're going, is 16%. So, you know, 16% haste with 370 gear if you've got a reasonable balance of your stats there. That's where we're looking at. So it's not like in Legion where we went, okay, we might have had really low haste when we got to level cap, but we very quickly got it to over 20%. By the time we were starting raiding, we were on 20%, or I was. I think most people would have been. But then I also remember back in WoD. In WoD I wasn't. I was between 5 and 10% haste throughout the whole expansion. So, you know, it sort of varies. But do get used to that. And also remember, in terms of the downtime, Blizzard want the extra downtime in. They have reined it back a little bit, but it is still going to be there. You're going to feel it. Even when you're in your raid and you're in your raid finery, you are going to feel it there. It's going to be there. Just embrace it. That's all there is to that. So there you are. If you've got any specific questions, then ask them below. I wouldn't have thought, you know, leveling is not one of those you need to super min-max anyway for most people. Remember, there's several weeks before the first raid opens up. If you know, I used to have to fit it around work because they never release an expansion during a holiday except this time. So I can do it a bit more chill this time anyway. I am going to be streaming it when it does go live for a little bit anyway. I don't know how long I'm going to stay up, but I'll stay up for a bit. And the other thing is just to note that the Essentials Guide will be out before it goes live. That's my big job this weekend, to try and sort that out. Hopefully I'll have it, from my point of view, late-ish on Sunday. But it will be there before the whole thing goes live. But just remember, it's not... They haven't made any of the changes that they might be thinking of as yet. I'm sure they're going to wait for me to publish it and then make me tear my hair out. But you already know what you need to know. If you've been following the channel anyway and you've looked at the guide for like 110 content with the patch, you sort of know most of the things you need to know anyway. So I think you're ready. I think you're ready. It'll be fine. And there's still a few weeks. And remember, they're still tuning anyway. They're tuning. They're not only tuning our abilities, they're tuning the Azeroth traits still. You know, Expurgation, I think, took a big hit because that was the one that was way out there. And they're also going to... Don't expect Abyssalists with traits either, because they're going to be situational. Really. So, and there's various traits that are actually quite handy, but again, situational. And the same thing is going to apply with a number of bits and pieces, talents notwithstanding as well. But I'll try and keep you up to date with everything as and when it comes out. But yeah, my big job this week is the Essentials Guide. Hopefully the tips today have been useful to you. If you've got any further ones, you can add them to the comments. If you come up with any good ones, I'll pin them so other people can see them. And have a good time leveling. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with others who might also have found it useful. And until next time, I'll see you later.